Welcome to another Hand Drink Solo wine info video where we review curious wines for curious minds. Today's bottling is an absolute end of an era wine, which is the Meyer Palmiet Chardonnay 2022, the absolute last vintage that Stompie Meyer made from his Palmiet vineyard in Elgin. Now, Stompie has been making and releasing this wine for 15 years, so one can't help but feel a little sad and wistful. But it's not all mournful nostalgia, because with this little ending, there is an exciting beginning as well. But we'll talk more about that later. When pondering the birth or the beginning of a wine like the Palmiet Chardonnay, you might be inclined to ask, what on earth could possibly make a hairy, tattooed young sapling of a winemaker like Johann Stompie Meyer choose a rather sedate region like Elgin? And the answer was that he decided that he really wanted to make cool climate wine. And in South Africa, kind of 15 to 20 years ago, there were only three options. And that was pretty much Walker Bay, some parts of Constantia, and Elgin. And that's what's so wild about South African wine, because we've been making wine for 350 years. But the last 30 years have seen some absolute paradigm-shifting changes. It's been pure upheaval. Even since 2010, in the 15 years or so since then, there have been huge amounts of change. Now, if you want cool climate wines, you could go to the Cederberg at up near 1,000 meters above sea level, or the Ceres Plateau at 1,000 meters above sea level, or Piket Bo-Berg at 800 meters above sea level. And you've still got those main regions like Agulhas, Elgin, Walker Bay, and some parts of southern Constantia. But back then, Stompie had but a handful of options, and Elgin was the one he chose, not least of all because it has some delightful coffee clip soil, something that for Stompie is absolute gold in a vineyard. There's a little life hack from Johann Stompie Meyer, and I know that many of you are sitting around going, I really want to buy a vineyard, but I just don't know where I'll be able to grow outstanding Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Well, Stompie's got the answer for you. He says follow the orchards, because where you find apples and pears, you can guarantee it's going to be stellar terroir for Pinot Noir or Chardonnay. And Elgin has exactly that. In fact, Elgin's been doing apples and pears for roughly 125 years. I think it was Oak Valley Estate that first had apples and pears planted on it at the turn of the last century. So now you know for when you next have to purchase a vineyard. But you might ask, if Elgin is still a reliable, wonderful, cool climate area, why is Stompie leaving? Why is he no longer making the Palmiet Chardonnay? Well, the answer is because he has started anew. I've made loads of videos about this, but the short version is Piket Bo-Berg is a elevated ward in the northern end of the Swartland with delightfully cold nights and dry climate. So while Elgin is cool, it has disease pressure, which means there's moisture in the air, there are clouds through the valley, which is part of the reason why it is cool, and that can cause issues with vines. But go up to Piket Bo-Berg, you've got no mist, very cold nights, dry air, and therefore disease pressure is way lower. So while Elgin may have lovely clay soils, which can bring texture and richness, according to Stompie, Piket Bo-Berg has absolutely no disease. And so for a man who wants to make organic wines with absolutely no spraying, no pesticides, no disease repellents, Piket Bo-Berg is an infinitely safer bet than even an esteemed region like Elgin. And that is why in 2019, just 4 years after they bought the farm, Stompie planted 1.8 hectares of Chardonnay. And as he says, they're still paying the school fees because no one else has planted grapes up there. So every time he plants anything, he's the first guy to do it and has to wait to see how things turn out. But the results are incredibly promising, and we're enormously excited to see what will come out of there. But let's not talk about potential. Let's get into the glass and see what's actually in front of us. When we give this guy a sniff, well, you get a lovely bit of everything. A hint of a smoky reduction element. And this is because half of this wine is matured in concrete, which allows very little oxygen in. And the rest is matured in older oak. So you do get elements of a kind of almost almond brittle note in there. And you've got these two working together, the savory, smoky, reductive with a touch of the sweeter hint of oak spice. He might even be grumpy with me for saying that, but there's definitely an almond brittle note that then flows over your aromas of peach fruit, a little bit of apple skin, and even a little I want to say it smells of daisies, but daisies don't even smell that nice. But it's kind of like a polleny, sweet, white flower note that isn't quite jasmine. Then, when we give it a sip, well, there is a zing, to say the least. That hint of apple that we smelt presents as a kind of quite zingy Granny Smith acidity down the side of the tongue. And there's also a beautiful hint of salinity, savoriness, but none of that dominates the core element of delightful citrus fruit, lime, a little bit of lemon zest. Someone has described this wine as lemon, curd, and clotted cream. I think that might be reaching a little far, but you do get the sense of creamy texture on the palate, partially because of Lee's contact, leaning up against fresher, quite vibrant citrus and stone fruit. So if we sum up the wine, I guess it's both a culmination and a transition, because it is the end of an era for Stompie in Elgin, but it's also an exciting signpost to what's coming next. And in case you want to know what's coming next, well, I've left links to 2 videos, both of which talk about some of the really exciting things that are happening up in this newly minted wine ward of Piket Bo-Berg on the northern end of the Swartland.